So if we start looking at some of the other things that are being done in this society, for instance, the use of aspartame, widespread use of aspartame, which is also proven to be a brain toxin, without any question. It's also linked to an increased incidence of cancer, to any reasonable objective mind. These studies prove it. When we look at the effects of MSG, monosodium glutamate, and other food additives that are excitotoxins on brain and behavior, when we look at the effects on reproduction of these things, for instance, fluoride reduces reproduction. It influences sperm mobility, sperm production, and testosterone level in males. And it bioaccumulates in these organs and gradually reduces the ability to reproduce. When we look at aluminum, lead, all of these things that are ending up in our water system, our food that are being given as food additives, we're seeing some common effects. They have behavioral effects, they have reproductive effects, and they have effects on health like cancer and degenerative brain disorders. And it's well demonstrated in the scientific literature. The question you have is, why are the regulatory agencies not approaching this? Why are they still allowing this? When there's compelling evidence that it's harmful. Just to be on the safe side, you would think, when millions of people are exposed to this every day, they would at least warn the public that it has effects on your reproduction, has effects on your risk of cancer, has effects on your brain function, your cognitive function, your memory, learning. It has effects on the development of the brain of the child. When all these things are known and in the scientific literature and peer-reviewed journals, why is the public being kept in the dark? And so, just answer that question yourself without saying, well, they're doing it on purpose. You have to say, well, either they're doing it on purpose or they're the most incredibly stupid, incompetent people in the world, and they don't deserve to be in positions of power and should be removed from positions of power. And people with good cognitive sense replace them. There's the only two choices you have in this debate. Either they're incredibly stupid and incompetent or criminal, or they're doing it on purpose for a reason, which goes back to the Rockefeller design of human engineering. When we look at vaccinations, this country vaccinates children at a rate higher than anywhere in the entire world. They get something like 46 different antigen exposures before they start school. They're getting 26 to 30 by age 1. Now, I've made the case in a number of articles I've published in peer-reviewed journals that this is very harmful to the brain. I've outlined the mechanism by which it does it. And yet the policy continues, and every day we see the federal government pushing more vaccinations in collusion with the pharmaceutical companies that are making high profits off of it. International organizations are pushing it. And you have to ask why. Now, there's a recent study that's been done by Neil Miller. And in this study, he compared the mortality of infants age 1 and children 5 years and younger in relationship to the number of vaccines they receive. It is a direct dose response in every country examined. For instance, the United States has the highest vaccination rate in the world, and it is 44th in the world in infant health. In other words, we have infant mortality that's 44th in the world. Now, for a nation that's supposed to be the leader of health care, why are we so far down the list of infant mortality in terms of high levels of infant mortality? And it directly correlates to the number of vaccines. And if you follow the number of vaccines, it's a straight line, which shows a dose response of this toxicity of the vaccines. And it makes sense, because when you over-vaccinate, it interferes with the development of the brain. And then the child has difficulty learning, they become behavioral problems, and their brain cannot develop normally. And this is happening on a very, very wide scale We're talking about 90% of children in this country are getting this huge number of vaccinations. And despite the fact that we have this compelling evidence that it is harmful to the developing brain, we have healthcare officials who are totally ignoring this and continue to promote it. So we have to ask, where is this going to stop? How many more toxins are they going to add to the burden to these people, which is going to shorten their lifespan, interfere with their ability to think clearly? And why would you want your population to be apathetic and unable to think clearly and make decisions as independent thinking minds? I was one of the first people in the published literature to say when you remove thimerosal from the vaccines, you're not going to see much of a difference in autism rate. Everyone else that's working in this field was convinced it was the mercury. Now, there's no question mercury is toxic to the developing brain. There's no question about that. But the greatest toxicity is the number of vaccines being given and the fact that you're overstimulating the immune system. When you powerfully and repeatedly stimulate the immune system, it activates the brain's immune cell, the microglia, and that secretes destructive compounds, excitotoxins, immune cytokines, that have been proven beyond any shadow of a doubt in hundreds of research papers to produce abnormal development of the brain and destruction of certain areas of the brain and types of neurons. That's well known, that's established. Now, you have to ask, again, if this is so well known, why do we keep adding new vaccines? Because now we're insisting not only do they get the 46 vaccine, but then every 4 years, many of these vaccines are to be repeated throughout the rest of their life, even into adulthood. It's been estimated that they're going to propose 150 vaccines for adults throughout your life. Well, there's no way that the brain can tolerate 115 repetitive vaccinations. So it's not necessarily the mercury. The mercury adds to the toxicity, but it's the fact that the brain is being overstimulated immunologically.
Sure.
And that's proven.
And they also recently announced a new Army plan to develop DNA vaccines, which would use an electrostimulation process and supposedly go directly to the cells. And it would also, part of the project would be so they could deliver multiple vaccines in one quick blast, not have to use new needles for everyone, so they could do things fairly quickly. But do you have any idea what the potential dangers would be of DNA vaccines?
Well, it is an area that they're looking into so that they can give it in fewer vaccination exposures. And that's because they have difficulty getting people to keep coming in and getting these dozens and dozens of vaccines, so it'd be a lot more convenient just to give one. But you're still immunologically stimulating the body in a very, very powerful way over a prolonged period of time. If you do that in animals, it damages the brain. If you do that in animals that are young or during pregnancy, it will reproduce things like schizophrenia or autism.
Sure.
And we know in women, pregnant women, if during their pregnancy they develop a viral infection, the incidence of schizophrenia and autism goes up tremendously in their offspring as they get older. Of course, schizophrenia doesn't present until their teenage years. So there's a long period between the vaccination and the appearance of the schizophrenia, which gave a deniability for a long period of time. Well, the new research has shown it's not the virus that's causing the schizophrenia. It's the mother's immune reaction to the virus. So when her immune system is activated, it activates the baby's brain immune system and produces a process called immunoexcitotoxicity that produces abnormal brain development and the schizophrenia and autism. When you stimulate the body's immune system, it automatically activates the brain's immune system, which is a separate immune system. It's operated by the microglia type brain cell. When that brain cell is activated during a natural infection, it's activated, kills the virus or bacteria, and then it shuts down. If you immunologically activate it by giving injections, like you do with a vaccine, it turns it on and it doesn't turn off very well. You give another vaccine a month later, 2 months later, that cell becomes hyperreactive. So the next reaction is infinitely more intense than the first one. So the brain stays in this state of chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation of the brain is what's thought to lead to such diseases in adults like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Lou Gehrig's disease, Huntington's disease. And in infants and small children, it leads to neurodevelopmental problems, difficulty learning, ADD, ADHD. I think recently on the news they talked about the link between pesticides and ADHD. Well, the interesting thing, pesticides do the same thing as vaccines do. They activate this microglial immune cell in the brain. So what the pesticide is doing chemically is the same thing that the vaccine does during the injection. That is, it produces chronic brain inflammation, leading to ADHD, autism, schizophrenia, and sets you up later in life for chronic brain degeneration. This is the thing that's well demonstrated in the scientific literature, particularly neuroscience literature, but being totally ignored by the media, by health authorities, by regulatory agencies, by the people promoting vaccine. They're completely keeping this silent and away from the general public, so that mothers and people getting these multiple vaccinations do not know the danger that's inherent in this practice. If you look back at what Dr. Kay is saying in her book on molecular biology, that in 1910 this was the dream of these elitists, was to recreate man in the image of the elitist idea. And it was funded by enormous amounts of money from the tax-free foundations, which hide what they're doing with other types of philanthropy. So if they are using their money for art museums and education programs and things that have a lot of public appeal, then underneath that they can hide these other things that they're doing. And then if they are exposed by someone, then they say, oh, well, we're promoting these vaccine programs in Africa because we care about these poor people and we're trying to protect them against these diseases, or we're doing this fluoridation program because we're interested in people's the health of their teeth. So it's easy to hide the true motivation of what you're doing. Now, do we have the smoking gun that proves this is what they're doing? Well, we don't have the exact smoking gun because they're smarter than that. They're not going to put it exactly in writing. But when you look at the writings of the Rockefellers and the Ford Foundation, they hint at these things, that population needs to be controlled, that we need to re-engineer human thinking and behavior. So if they're in favor of social engineering, if they're in favor of this science of man idea of remaking the human mind, it's a pretty strong indication that they will use their enormous power, influence, and enormous amounts of money in conjunction with pharmaceutical companies and others to bring these ideas about. You know, I find it ironic when people say they don't believe in certain conspiracy theories. Well, it's like H.G. Wells wrote his book. The title of his book is Open Conspiracy. Because it's not secret, and this is what you usually hear is, well, if this was true, how could they keep it secret? Well, they don't need to keep it secret. And it's not a secret because they write a lot about it. They write about the need for control in these different areas. They write about how we need to control behavior and how we need to re-engineer man. So it's in their writings. It's an open conspiracy, but they can keep people from making that final link because they never actually say exactly how they're doing it and what they're doing. It's just they fund it. You look for the funding behind things like fluoridation, and you look for funding behind some of these other efforts, and it always goes back to the tax-free foundations are the driving force behind it. And they're producing the justification for it by hiding it behind benevolent claims.